Alright, what's happening, y'all? It's your boy Rico from Street Scores, and again, another video comes out that pushes back my training camp breakdown for what happened today in day 11 of Washington Commanders training camp. Now the Commanders have come out with their first unofficial depth chart. We are 4 days away from our first preseason game, so this makes a lot of sense. And of course, we got to dive into this entire depth chart, look at every position group, see where I agree, see where I disagree, any surprises, any automatics that we're like, yeah, of course that's how that goes. And I mean, we're mostly looking at the receiver position. Who's winning those last 2 spots? We already know Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, Curtis Samuel, and Dyami Brown take up 4 of the 6 spots. Now we have like 9 guys fighting for the last 2. We got to take a look at who's starting on the offensive line as of right now, and what's the order, because the order is really interesting there as far as the depth chart goes as well. Who's the top tight ends, and then even like the DB group, who's the top guys there, and also linebacker, who's your 2 starting linebackers as of right now, who's your starting corners, all of that type of stuff, man. So I'm really excited about this. I can't wait to dive into this one because I'm already getting like a preview right now while I'm talking to y'all for this intro, and I'm like, oh yeah, we got some stuff to talk about here. This is a little chaotic. There's a few surprises here, definitely a few surprises, pretty surprising in a few position groups, but we're gonna get to that. But before we dive into all of that, make sure you stiff arm the like button, stiff arm the subscription button, and stiff arm the bell next to that subscription button so you get a notification each and every time I release an informative and opinionated video just like this one. Make sure y'all stay tuned for all of the Commanders content. Like I said, any random updates like this, any breaking news, daily training camp breakdowns. I'm uploading the clips from the practices. I'm also breaking down what happened throughout the practices, going through every position group and giving y'all injury updates, all of that type of stuff, even special teams. And also, of course, stay tuned for all of the rookie film sessions I'm working on. And also, of course, I will be live streaming every preseason game, every regular season game, all of that type of stuff. So make sure y'all pull up for those live streams. I need to go ahead and schedule that now so y'all can go ahead and set the reminder on your YouTube channels and all that type of stuff. So yeah, man, so much content coming out. I'm probably gonna hold the call shows afterwards, like how I do the live call-in show. Y'all call in after a game and voice your opinions on how you felt the game went and all that type of stuff. I'll probably hold that after the preseason games as well, but y'all already know I'm definitely gonna do that for the regular season. So man, without further ado, let's go ahead and get to it. Let's get it.
You tell your family you're gonna be a commander.
And man, this is crazy because we just signed defensive back Joshua Kalu like literally like an hour ago, if that. And he's not even on this official depth chart, which is really interesting. But I'm assuming they probably already had this like ready to go, ready to upload, and then they signed him like shortly afterwards. I'm guessing, because it's crazy that we just signed this guy and he's not here. I was looking through the list like, where is he? But whatever. Let's go ahead and get to it, man. We're gonna start with the offense. Let's start with, since it's at the top, the receiver group right now. Of course, your starters are Terry McLaurin, Curtis Samuel, Jahan Dotson, and Dyami Brown. Those are your 4 locks, like I've already said in the intro of this video, like I've said in previous videos, live streams, all kinds of stuff. And I just feel like at this point, everybody should know these are your starting, your primary 4 wide receivers, the guys that are locks to make the roster. Dyami Brown even is a lock. Then after that, apparently it looks like it's Dax Milne and Byron Pringle who's winning the race for those last 2 spots. But don't sleep, because you have my boy Bryson Tremaine, you have Kyrick McGowan and Marcus Kemp right behind them, and surprisingly you have Kazmir Allen, Mitchell Tinsley, Zion Bowens, and Jalen Sample as like the furthest back on the depth chart. I'm very surprised by this because everything that I've seen and heard so far coming out of training camp, that Mitchell Tinsley is probably one of the guys that's winning the position battle right now. At the very least, he's the one that's been making the most plays. He's been out there with the second teamers probably more than a lot of those other guys I've already named, and he's even played with the starters occasionally and even made plays with them. So I think you could argue that Mitchell Tinsley has made the most plays out of everybody not named those top 4 guys. But at the same time, and I'm gonna talk about this in depth on my training camp breakdown video, I guess, that I'm gonna come out with after this. Should have been came out with it, but then we signed the DB, then this unofficial depth chart came out, so it just keeps getting pushed back. But basically, I mean, it just depends on what we're talking about, positional flex. And again, I do that positional flex thing annoys me because it's like I hate being a jack of all trades, right, and then not being a master of any. That annoys me. But I mean, at the same time, Dax Milne is fighting for this roster spot. He's a pure slot. You really don't expect him to play much else in the receiver group, so that limits his positional flex. But at the same time, he's a special teams guy. Even in training camp today, since Tress Way was a little hurt and he wasn't participating in practice today, again, I'm gonna talk about that in my training camp breakdown. Dax Milne was the one like holding the punts, like setting it up for Joey Sly to kick it through the field goal. So, and then he's also your starting punt returner from last season. That's his positional flex. Byron Pringle plays every receiver position on the receiver group, and he showcases some kick return potential there. And then also Marcus Kemp is arguably our best special teams blocker. Again, look at that, the Chiefs Super Bowl against the Eagles and how many blocks he had on people in that one big Kadarius Toney return where they put the game away. That's huge. Kyrick McGowan's competing at punt return as well. Bryson Tremaine, I mean, he may not have a lot of positional flex, but him and Marcus Kemp are our only receivers that are taller than 6'1". They're both like 6'5" and above. They're like our potential Cam Sims replacements if you're not just gonna just by default and say, oh, well, our tight end groups will be our tall receivers. We'll have no actual tall, pure receivers on the roster. If you want to have a pure receiver that's actually tall on this roster that has jump ball ability, Bryson Tremaine has been making the most plays in training camp so far between him and Marcus Kemp. But again, Marcus Kemp, like I already said, is irreplaceable on special teams. So I think it's hard for me to believe that he won't make the roster just off of that alone, but you never know. Maybe other people step up. Again, Mitchell Tinsley has been balling out. Kazmir Allen is my leading candidate, my favorite option to replace Dax Milne as our starting punt returner. He's all the way at the back of the depth chart right now. So the receiver group is chaotic right now, but as always, this is a great problem to have. I mean, how many years have we just like we gone in and we already knew the top 5 receivers and maybe even the top 6, and we were like, I mean, maybe there'll be a few surprises, but it's pretty obvious who they are. Now, right now, the 9 guys fighting for the last 2 spots, it's really up in the air. I wouldn't be able to place my life savings on any combination of 2 guys. I feel like Dax Milne is fairly safe. I feel like Byron Pringle has a good chance. I feel like Mitchell Tinsley with the plays he's been making has a good chance. I feel like Marcus Kemp has a good chance. Again, Bryson Tremaine being the only dependable tall receiver, because Marcus Kemp is like 6'5", 6'6", but he's not even a Cam Sims. I think Bryson Tremaine has a higher ceiling than Cam Sims. So Bryson Tremaine is the better receiver potential than a Marcus Kemp. But again, Marcus Kemp, irreplaceable in special teams. It's completely up in the air right now. Nobody can predict where this is going to go. Preseason is going to really matter for these guys. Those joint practices with the Ravens and these 3 preseason games are going to be huge, but who gets these last 2 spots? And again, you got to present positional flex, because Ron Rivera even talked about that in his press conference after practice today. But again, like I already broke down, what do you mean by positional flex? Do you mean positional flex in the receiver position? You can play the X, Y, and Z like a Byron Pringle, or Dax Milne, where you could be the returner, the guy that holds the punts for the kicker if Tress Way is hurt. It's so much chaos right now. So many guys, so few spots. That's arguably one of the most interesting competitions right now in training camp. And then we might as well just stay here and look at the offensive line. Your starter from left to right, Charles Leno at left tackle, Sadiq Charles at left guard. Very surprising over Chris Paul right now. Nick Gates is starting center, Samuel Cosme starting right guard, and Andrew Wiley right tackle. So the starters other than Sadiq Charles starting over Chris Paul is a surprise. I'm not gonna lie. At this point, I'm just assuming that this depth chart was finalized and ready to be uploaded to the website and printed for us to see like a week ago, because there's no new DB that we just signed. The Mitchell Tinsley has been balling out the last few days, and he's all the way at the bottom. And then Sadiq Charles hasn't even really practiced much the past couple of days. And Chris Paul has not only started at left guard, but looked really good at left guard. First of all, he's healthy, he's dependable. Him and Charles Leno already have some interesting chemistry going over there. Like I already talked about with my training camp breakdown from yesterday/last night, Charles Leno and Chris Paul have been doing a great job of even pulling and getting to the secondary, the second level, to block DBs and linebackers and allowing running backs to pretty much go untouched for several yards. And it's just like Chris Paul has basically been showing out. He's taken that opportunity to start at left guard and hasn't played around with it. And even on top of that, Mason Brooks has been balling out in camp so far. So I'm even a little surprised that he's all the way at the bottom, because being a priority undrafted free agent, which is interesting because you know, not often do you have to bid for a guy. There were so many teams trying to sign Mason Brooks. Mason Brooks had basically the choice to pick us. He chose us more than we chose him. Let's just put it that way. There were a lot of teams, and we had to pay him more money just to win him over other teams trying to get him. This is not your typical undrafted free agent that we just kind of, might as well bring him in and see what happened. It was a bidding war for him, and then he's pulled up and has embarrassed our second round pick from last year for Darian Mathis, who's having a great camp, but he's been embarrassing him. He's had great reps even against guys like Deron Payne in practice. I think there's a good chance that he makes the roster, so it's interesting that he's behind Aaron Montero and Nolan Laufenberg, and even though I'm a big fan of Jared Jones-Smith from the XFL, arguably the best offensive lineman from the XFL last year, the fact that he's behind all of those guys is very interesting to me. I think at this point, because of that, and also the fact that Chris Paul isn't starting over Sadiq Charles, I think we probably shouldn't read into this depth chart too much, because Mason Brooks should not be dead last behind Nolan Laufenberg and Aaron Montero. The way he's been performing, not only in team drills, but most importantly one-on-ones and like literally stonewalling everybody, embarrassing people, I just can't see it. But the backup tackle positions are interesting as well, because Brandon Daniels, that just means that we're still trying him at tackle, even though it hasn't been working out yet. He had a pretty decent day against KJ Henry a couple of days ago, but overall it just hasn't looked good. But that's what we kind of expected coming out of the draft. He's extremely raw. They're going to keep trying him at tackle, and it may be a developmental project that takes more than 1 year, probably even like a couple of years. So don't expect Brandon Daniels to start at tackle for us anytime soon, if he plays at all. But then also the starting center situation. Nick Gates is your starting center, and I'm not surprised by that. Even though he got yelled at by Eric Bieniemy and had to come out the game for throwing the ball at Darian Mathis. Darian Mathis' name is going to be mentioned a lot when we're talking the offensive line. Either he's fighting somebody, going one-on-one with somebody, going at it, getting it. Darian Mathis is a very polarizing figure this season. It's really interesting. Feels like a free draft pick because we barely got to see him last year. But the fact that Tyler Larson is your second string center, which is interesting because everything I've heard and seen so far in practices, he's been your third string center. Apparently, Ricky Strongberg surpassed him but became our second string center as of like mandatory minicamp. So since we started training camp, I thought Ricky Strongberg was your second string center. But again, this depth chart, I guess we shouldn't read into it too much. But this is really interesting. So I'm assuming the thing that you take away from this depth chart the most is how the snaps may be divided in the first preseason game. So when you're out there with the starters, you have Nick Gates. When you're out there with the second stringers, you have Tyler Larson. When you're out there with the third stringers, that's Ricky Strongberg. So sadly, Ricky Strongberg is probably going to be blocking for Jake Fromm, and I really feel sorry for him on that end. Jake Fromm threw like a couple of interceptions today alone. And then after that, I mean, that's really about it for the offensive line. Still really interesting. The starters make sense except for Sadiq Charles over Chris Paul. I think Chris Paul has already surpassed them. First of all, Sadiq Charles, even if he comes back 100% healthy, can you depend on him to stay healthy an entire season? If not, which I highly doubt, you might as well just go ahead and move on to Chris Paul now. It seems like you're probably going to end up having to do it at some point in the season anyway. You might as well just go ahead and let him be the starting left guard, and he looks so good against the Cowboys in his first start of a career. 7th round pick, crazy ceiling. The fact that he's good enough, I feel like, to start a left guard now, and he's only going to get better because, again, his RES score, his athleticism, he's a freak athlete. That's a guy that's only going to get better every day. You go ahead and start him now, and hopefully by week 1, he's more polished, and he's your best left guard option, period. And maybe Mason Brooks is his backup because, again, Sadiq Charles, I'm not dependent on him to stay healthy. I don't care what's going on. And then moving on to quarterback, Sam Howell, Jacoby Brissett, Jake Fromm, obviously. Now, Jacoby Brissett got some first-team reps today. I'm going to do a whole breakdown of why that happened in my training camp video, but don't read into it too much. Sam Howell is your starting quarterback, point blank, period. I don't see him losing that job at all because, like I've already explained in several videos, Jacoby Brissett has kind of been more consistent, you can say, but Sam Howell does things that Jacoby Brissett can never dream of doing with his arm talent, with the deep balls, the accuracy, and things like that, and even mobility-wise. Sam Howell's flashes flash way brighter than Jacoby Brissett's flashes ever do, and so Jacoby Brissett is, again, more consistent, but in my opinion, you take the more talented guy and you develop him to become more consistent rather than taking the consistent guy and try to develop more talent out of him. That's almost impossible. So I'll take my chances with Sam Howell any day. Plus, he's also been good enough to where I'm comfortable with him being our starting quarterback. Not like Sam Howell's just still this extremely raw prospect. He's improved in mechanics, decision making, being able to read the field and stuff like that, going through his progressions. In accuracy, he's developed quite a bit. He's still not a great, perfect quarterback prospect just yet. He's not Pat Mahomes. I'm not saying that at all, but he's definitely further ahead in his development at this point in the season than I expected. If you would have asked me 5 months ago where would Sam Howell be after 2 weeks of training camp, I never would have thought he would have been as good and have as high of a floor that he has currently. He's definitely further ahead than I thought, but again, he's not finished. Then running back wise, Brian Robinson, Antonio Gibson, obviously. Then that's interesting that you have Jonathan Williams and Chris Rodriguez in the same bracket, Derek Gore and Jared Patterson in the last one. Derek Gore's looked pretty good so far in training camp, but he did have that one fumble that was returned for a touchdown by, I believe that was Derek Forrest a couple of practices ago. Maybe the day I think the offense was terrible, everybody was fighting. It was like a few days ago. But I think it's really interesting that Jonathan Williams is above Jared Patterson once again, because I feel like Chris Rodriguez, if anything, is just Jonathan Williams, but maybe better. Maybe he comes with less of a floor because he's not a seasoned veteran like Jonathan Williams, but I feel like he's basically just Jonathan Williams with more potential. And I just feel like Jared Patterson is the only running back out of that entire room that has that niche that I always hype up and I'm really hype about. First of all, kick returner potential. He's competing for the kick returner job like he does every offseason, but also that height, man. The other teams just don't normally have a guy like that they can practice against and be prepared for. When you're about to face us and you only have a few days, less than a week to prepare, and you got to somehow simulate Jared Patterson's height behind all of those big offensive linemen and defensive linemen, you know how difficult it is for a linebacker and a DB to find that guy before it's too late. When you don't practice for that all summer. That's why I'm glad that we at least have them. So another team tries to throw out there a really small running back, our linebackers already prepared for it. They've seen it. They've dealt with it all summer. Other teams, I feel like Jared Patterson is that secret weapon you can bring out every now and then and catch them off guard. He's a one-cut runner. He sees the opening, he's gone, and by then it's too late for the linebackers. That's why it seems like every time we throw Jared Patterson in the game, the defense just looks surprised, like they don't know what's going on. They don't know where he's at. They don't know what to do. It's really weird to me that Jared Patterson is still below Jonathan Williams. The Commanders just like Jonathan Williams more than him right now. And Chris Rodriguez, I'm not surprised. He's supposed to be in this third bracket behind Antonio Gibson and Brian Robinson. And then your fullback, Alex Armall, even though he's technically like doubling up as a tight end right now, like he always does, but Ron Rivera said he's improving as a tight end. And especially with Logan Thomas missing the last couple of practices, Alex Armall has been doing a little bit more tight end things in practice anyway. Now moving on to the defense, this is where we start to have fun. Starting with the defensive line, you already know your starters. What are we even here for that? What's interesting is the backups, and I feel like KJ Henry, if he's not already better and already the third best edge rusher, only behind Montez Sweat and Chase Young, I feel like by week 1 he should be. I feel like he has loads of potential and crazy talent and has a really high ceiling. He is fairly raw, but I don't think he's raw enough to be behind James Smith-Williams. I think he's already surpassed him, but if he hasn't already, then I feel like by week 1 he definitely should, so I'm not worried about that. I think KJ Henry is going to be a really good edge rusher for us. James Smith-Williams, Casey Hill, all of those guys are cool. I like them. But I just really and F.A. Obata too. F.A. Obata, you could play him at defensive tackle or defensive end. I feel like KJ Henry is our third best edge rusher, or at the very least he will be by week 1. Andre Jones has made a couple of plays in practice. I'm not a huge Andre Jones fan coming out of our final pick of the 2023 NFL draft, but he's been making some plays. We'll see. Of course, defensive tackle depth wise, we have loads of it. F.A. Obata, Abdullah Anderson, and even Curtis Brooks, who we recently just signed a couple of days ago. He has a crazy high ceiling, so I'm really excited about him. William Bradley King is always hanging around and usually ends up making the practice squad. Well, last year I think he did make the practice squad originally. Then we ended up bringing him back later on. But either way, you also have Joshua Pryor and stuff like that. The defensive line is really deep, though. Having F.A. Obata off the bench, KJ Henry, James Smith-Williams, Case Tuoff off the bench is kind of a blessing. I feel like those players could honestly probably start for some other defensive lines. I'm not going to sit here and boost them up to the point where I would say that KJ Henry or any of those other guys could start on any other defensive line, but I think there are other defensive lines that James Smith-Williams, Case Tuoff, and KJ Henry could easily start for this season. And then also linebacker-wise, note the fact that your middle linebacker is Cody Barton and then your outside linebacker is Jamin Davis, which I feel like is a really good thing. The fact that Cody Barton can handle having the green dot on his helmet, he's going to be the one with the headset, listening to Jack Del Rio calling the plays, telling the defense what to do, getting everybody in the right spots. He's going to do more thinking. Jamin Davis is going to do more moving, and that's when Jamin Davis is at his best. It seemed like he was getting better and better and better. So Cole Holcomb got hurt. Then Cole Holcomb transferred that green dot to Jamin Davis. Jamin Davis had to do far more thinking, and less movement than he's used to doing, and then he just seemed like he wasn't as good as he was. He wasn't terrible, but Jamin Davis is at his best when he's thinking less and moving more. So let Cody Barton handle most of the thinking. Let Jamin Davis use that freakish athleticism if he's not in jail, and go crazy. And then Khaleke Hudson is your third linebacker, which is really like solid depth there. I think that's a solid linebacker group. By the way that you see it on the depth chart, I don't care what they say we are with a 4-3 base or whatever. We're rarely going to have 3 linebackers out there. You're more likely to have 1 linebacker out there than 3, I believe. And so we're usually only going to have 2. And to have Khaleke Hudson as a guy that comes in and is part of his rotation is really good, because he's been doing a good job in coverage against guys like Logan Thomas, your starting tight end, who's like Sam Howell's favorite target right now. They were doing pass blocking drills yesterday with like the running backs and the tight ends versus the linebackers and the DBs, the safeties and stuff like that. And Khaleke Hudson probably shined the most against like Brian Robinson, against Antonio Gibson, all those guys trying to pick him up, and he was just running right around him or right through him. So Khaleke Hudson as a depth linebacker with the way that he surged and developed is huge. I think that's pretty good linebacker depth. His development is huge for us to succeed on defense, because expecting Jamin Davis and Cody Barton to stay healthy for a full 17 games is a lot to hope for, and I just hope they do. But even if they do stay healthy, Khaleke Hudson coming in every now and then, being a really good coverage player, I'm really excited about him, and developing as a better run stopper, my fault. And then also David Mayo, of course. I mean, you don't really want to see him on the field much, but when it comes to 4th and 1, 3rd and 1, 4th and inches, goal line, if it's a run play, like 100% for a fact it's going to be a run play, David Mayo is a good linebacker there. But he's such a liability in coverage that if there's even a chance that a team might run some play action, he's over with. At that point, your defense is running 10 versus 11, because he can't contribute anything in coverage. Completely running in sand, wet sand at that. Then you have Dejon Harris, Milo Eifert, and Farrad Gardner. Of course, I'm always rooting for Farrad Gardner. He just went to the XFL. He's an interesting prospect. It's like a linebacker safety hybrid that, plays some Buffalo nickel for you. Doubt he makes the team, but I'm rooting for him. And then those other linebackers, we'll see how that goes. And then the DB group is always interesting, because most notably your starting corners are Kendall Fuller, Benjamin St-Juste, and Emmanuel Forbes. Kendall Fuller and Emmanuel Forbes are pure outside corners. And so Benjamin St-Juste, I guess by default, is your slot corner, but I prefer Benjamin St-Juste on the outside. I think he's a better outside corner than slot corner. So this whole situation is weird, and I don't know how this is going to go. I guess we're going to run out there, honestly, with our, typical nickel packages with Benjamin St-Juste in the slot, I guess. But then at the same time, if he's in the slot, where's Jartavius Martin? Because your starting safeties are Cameron Curl and Derek Forrest. So those are 5 DBs right there. If you have those 5 DBs out there and add Jartavius Martin, that's 6 DBs on the field. And I don't know how that's going to work. Now, we could just scroll back up the defense just to let you know we will run a lot of 5 defensive linemen. Fidarian Mathis squeeze right in between Jonathan Allen, Deron Payne right there. And we will run that defensive line setup probably more often this year than ever before. At least since Jack Del Rio's been here. Now that Fidarian Mathis. John Ridgway is an elite run stuffer, double team eater and stuff like that. But Fidarian Mathis brings you that, but also some pass rush potential. He's shown that sometimes in training camp today. So I'm really excited about that. But what made me talk about that is just like we're running out of space. You can only have 11 defenders on the field at a time. And I think Jartavius Martin is too good, too explosive, too versatile to keep off the field. He's going to have to be somewhere. I don't care if you play him at Buffalo nickel, slot corner, free safety, strong safety, whatever. Jartavius Quan Martin needs to be on the field as much as possible. If he's not tired, he needs to be on the field. But like I've been saying, this is a great problem to have. I mean, I really don't know how Jack Del Rio is going to do this, how he's going to mix it up and stuff, but I'm really intrigued and I'm excited. Nick Whiteside, DJ Sturgis, all of those guys are really interesting. Tariq Castro-Fields, Rashad Wildgoose. I'm surprised Rashad Wildgoose is above Tariq Castro-Fields. I haven't heard much of Rashad Wildgoose so far in training camp, but Tariq Castro-Fields, I've heard him making plays and all kinds of stuff. Jace Whitaker, who we signed like a couple of days ago. I'm still surprised that we don't have that boy that we just signed, Joshua Kalu, on the depth chart, but it is what it is because we just signed Jace Whitaker a couple of days ago. Christian Holmes and DeMarcus Fields, all of those guys back of the depth chart make a lot of sense. Danny Johnson, I mean, he provides you some special teams potential as like a returner, like a reserve returner. If everybody else in front of him gets hurt, he's like decent at it. And then also, I mean, he's a really good backup slot corner. Whenever he's at the start of slot corner for us, as long as it's November or later, he's been great. If it's October before, he's been terrible, including even in the preseason against backups. But something about after November, that man goes from like a 52 overall to like a 75 at minimum. Like, I don't know what it is. So I can see Danny Johnson making the roster, but at the same same time, it gets complicated because Benjamin St-Juste is forced to be a starting slot corner, I guess. Jartavius Martin, I think, is best suited for slot corner, even though he can play everywhere else. Then you even have Percy Butler, who's technically like your backup free safety, but can also play slot corner really well. I feel like Tariq Castro-Fields, I feel like is more slot corner than anything else. Rashard Wildgoose, you can argue. So it's just like, golly, how many slot corners we gonna have on this roster? Now, granted, a lot of the guys like Jartavius Martin and Percy Butler and I guess Tariq Castro-Fields, you can argue maybe a little versatile with it, and Benjamin St-Juste, because I feel like he's better outside corner than slot corner. So you have some slot corners that can play other positions. It's not like we just have a bunch of pure slot corners, but it's still a really weird situation. But again, like I always say, it's a great problem to have that we have so much talent. We have so many guys that can do so many things. We don't even exactly know which ones we're going to choose from, rather than looking at other rosters like, oh man, I hope they release this guy. I hope they release this guy. Because right now we don't have no options. Right now we have too many options, and I guess that's a good thing that we're dealing with right now. Jeremy Reeves, all-pro special teamer. He's going to make the team regardless, but it's interesting that he's technically a backup strong safety, whatever you want to call him. You have Kendall Smith, Terrell Burgess as well. Terrell Burgess has been making plays in practice so far too, especially mandatory minicamp. I was hearing his name more often then, but that's really interesting. So I think Percy Butler is definitely due for a bigger role. I think Jartavius Quan Martin is due for a bigger role than a lot of people expect. I mean, you got to remember he was a second-round pick. Typically, you expect second-round picks to start for you. So he's going to be part of the rotation heavily. This DB group is the most interesting, I don't know what we're about to do group out of the whole team right now by far. It's not even close. The receiving group with the competition, the fight for the last two spots is really interesting. But when we're talking about the secondary, who's going to start, who's going to play the most, let alone who's going to get the last few spots on the depth chart, I'm very confused by this, man. Jack Del Rio has his work cut out for him. Man, I'm not envious there, boy. And then special teams, I mean, of course, Tressway, Joey Slye with Michael Badgley as your backup, and Joey Slye so far has the edge over him from everything I've heard and seen. Of course, Cameron Cheeseman, but this is where it gets really fun. So far, kick return-wise, you have Antonio Gibson, Byron Pringle as your first and second. Then Dax Milne and Jared Patterson behind them. Punt return, Dax Milne is winning the job so far, but Jahan Dotson's right behind him. But Jahan Dotson could be one of our best punt returners available on the team, but we're going to protect him because he's such a deadly weapon on offense that's not very realistic. But then Kyrick McGowan is second. Kazmir Allen is third. I mean, I guess because Kyrick McGowan's already been here for a couple of years, never made the 53-man roster, but he's always here for training camp. So maybe that veteran experience is why he's above Kazmir Allen. But I feel like Kazmir Allen easily has the highest ceiling and potential out of everybody not named Jahan Dotson there. Again, I'm ignoring Jahan Dotson. He'll probably return to some punts maybe in preseason of practice, but you don't want to do it too often. He's too explosive on offense. He's too important to our offensive efficiency for him to be out there on punt returns consistently. So maybe throw him back there when we really, really need a big one. But at the same time, Kazmir Allen provides that potential and explosion, athleticism, and speed to where you wouldn't necessarily need a Jahan Dotson. The reason you kind of keep a Jahan Dotson in your pocket for punt returns in case, like break glass in case of emergency situations, is because Dax Milne has no explosion. Kazmir Allen has some explosion, so if he can work his way up to be more consistent and dependable, then you wouldn't even really need a Jahan Dotson as like a backup punt returner type of guy. But going to back up to kick returns, of course, Antonio Gibson's your starter, but it's really interesting that Byron Pringle's already ahead of Dax Milne and Jared Patterson. That's really interesting. I mean, granted, he is an ex-Chiefs, but I mean, that again brings us back to the receiver competition. If Byron Pringle right now looks like he's your kick returner right next to Antonio Gibson, it sounds like he's safe to make the roster, which now leaves it, I mean, just for that example. But then again, if Dax Milne is your starting punt returner, that's it. Your last spots on receivers have now gone to Dax Milne and Byron Pringle, which means that Mitchell Tinsley, who's been arguably balling out more than anybody else outside of the top four in training camp so far, and you can arguably even say that he's been making more plays than De'Ami Brown the last week. And then, so that means that Mitchell Tinsley doesn't make it, Marcus Kemp doesn't make it, Kyrick McGowan, Kazmir Allen doesn't make it. My boy Bryson Tremaine doesn't make it. It's really crazy and chaotic right now. Very interesting. Very, very interesting. But yeah, man, that's the end of this video. Please get in the comment section. Let me know how you feel about everything discussed in the video. How do you feel about this initial First unofficial depth chart going into the first preseason game. Do you agree or disagree with any of my points? How do you feel about everything, man? I'm really excited, man. The fact that we're coming out with unofficial depth charts just means that we're that much closer to real football. Again, we have a preseason game in 4 days. I will be live streaming for that, so make sure y'all stay tuned for that, man. I'm so excited. Of course, man, I appreciate all the support, man. Shouts out to all of my sponsors, especially my Pro Bowl sponsors' names you scrolling the screen right now. And don't forget to stiff arm that like button, stiff arm the subscription button, and stiff arm the bell next to that subscription button so you get a notification each and every time I release these videos, because this is my 3rd video today. I'm working on my training camp breakdown, which will be my 4th video today, and if you don't have that bell next to the subscription button hidden, you're probably not going to get a notification for all of those videos. You may get a notification for one of them, but you need to stay tuned just in case there's days like this where I have to release like 4 or 5 videos, and so that you're kept up to date and you know that I released all of those videos. So man, make sure you hit all of those, and I appreciate y'all. I'm gonna catch y'all later. I'm out.